Marisha here, continuing my series of free things to see and do in London. And today I'm going to be talking about historic estates, starting with Kenwood House. So, Kenwood House is located on the northwest edge of Hampstead Heath, and it dates back to the late 17th century, although it had some renovations in the 18th century. You might recognize it because it's been in several movies. So, films like Notting Hill and Sense and Sensibility have had scenes filmed there. But the interior is really gorgeous, with the rooms preserved the way that they would have looked back in the 18th century, with the furniture and the rich wall coverings. But what I think Kenwood is really most notable for is the artwork that it has. It has loads of great artwork, including by some of the old Dutch masters. So they have Vermeer and Rembrandt, but they also have, Gainsborough and Turner, lots of art. And for me, what the selling point of Kenwood House is, besides the fact that it's on Hampstead Heath, and so you can pair it with a stroll in nature, is they do a fantastic job of having well informed volunteers there. So, in most of the rooms, there will be someone just hanging around as a volunteer who can give you extra information about the history of the house or about some of the paintings. The last time I was there, one of the volunteers was telling me about a pair of portraits in one of the rooms. It was two brothers, and she was telling me about kind of their story, which was riddled with scandal, and it was just really fascinating to hear some of that history. So yeah, Kenwood does a fantastic job with their volunteers. Moving on to Queen's House in Greenwich. Queen's House dates back to the 1600s, and the architect who built it is often credited as introducing Palladian style to England. Um, Later on, there were two colonnades added to the building, so the exterior looks like really impressive, and the colonnades are really beautiful to walk along among when it's the summer. But the interior has plenty to look at. Like Kenwood House, there's a lot of art on display, including painted ceilings. But I think what Queen's House is more noted for than the artwork is two things, actually. First, there's the Great Hall, which is shaped like a square, and the floor is marble checkerboard. And you can get a great look at it because you can go up to the second floor, or for my British audience, the first floor, and go out on kind of like a little, like a balcony that surrounds it and look down on it. And it's just gorgeous. But even more famous, I think, than the Great Hall and its beautiful floor is the Tulip Staircase. This is a spiral staircase with a wrought iron railing that is bright blue, like a deep bright blue, made to look like tulips. And it's so pretty, and it's one of those things that if you want photos that are Instagrammable, you definitely need to go see it. Um, Besides just the beauty of the building itself, I think one of the selling points of Queen's House is that it is located right next to the National Maritime Museum. And um, so it can be part of like a really robust full day in Greenwich. I might do a separate video of just like a 1 day itinerary in different places, starting with Greenwich, because there is so much to do. Um, but particularly being right next door to National Maritime Museum, which is also free, it it's really easy to have like a nice full free day with Queen's House. Moving on to Fulham Palace. Fulham Palace in Fulham was home to the Bishop of London dating back to the 11th century. And so from the 11th century till I think 1973, it was the residence of the Bishop of London. So for almost a millennia. And then it's not the residence anymore, but it is still owned by the Church of England. And now it's a museum, and understandably, a lot of it is dedicated to the history of the palace. And, it's a rich history, obviously, because it's going back to the 1000s. But for me, like, it's less about the museum and more about the gardens. So there's a courtyard with a fountain in the center, which is lovely, but there's also an extensive gardens, including a greenhouse, which is really pretty. And when I was there last summer, they were actually selling vegetables. So you could get like free vegetables that had been grown in the greenhouse, or if they hadn't been grown there, they were grown locally, almost like a farm market deal. But in addition to the greenhouse, there are, you know, different flower beds and climbing plants on the walls because it's a walled garden, different shaped hedgerows and hedge mazes, things like that. And so if you're thinking about going to Fulham Palace, definitely go in the spring or the summer when it's nice weather and you can get the full enjoyment of the grounds. Um, One last thing about Fulham Palace, I don't know if this is a permanent display or not, but when I was there, they had a series of portraits of bishops of London throughout the years, including back to like St. Dunstan and stuff. But they were done by a contemporary artist in kind of almost like a pop art style. They were really cool. So I hope that that was a permanent display and not just a temporary one. I definitely look for that if you go. And then finally, Bruce Castle, which is located in Tottenham. Bruce Castle, when you go to it, you're not going to look at it and think like, yeah, that's a castle. It doesn't look very castle-y. You can see sort of remnants of how maybe it used to. It's gone through a lot of iterations throughout its time. I think it dates back to like the 15th century. And Bruce is from the House of Bruce, as in Robert the Bruce. They used to own it, but it has gone through lots of different owners. And in fact, until right before it became a museum, its last sort of life was as a school in the Victorian era. So now it's a museum dedicated to the area, like Tottenham. So you'll have information about Bruce Castle and some of the archaeological finds from there, and because people still aren't entirely sure how far back the building dates or how far back some sort of building on that site dates. Um, they're kind of still working on it. Um, but there is stuff about just Tottenham, including things about like Tottenham Spurs and things like that. What I like about Bruce Castle, and the reason that it made this list, because it is sort of localized, right? And less of universal appeal, I guess, when you say, oh, it's about Tottenham, than like Queen's House or Kenwood House, is that they have made an attempt to make it more than just like a small permanent collection that's like very localized. When I was there, they had a temporary exhibit upstairs of a female artist from the Victorian era and paintings of the women that she had painted. And it was a really well done display, very informative, so that you could read about like the historical context of what's going on when she's painting these things and what was her life like. And I appreciate that it was a female artist because still female artists are kind of underrepresented, particularly ones from bygone eras, right? Like I think we have this impression that women didn't really do art until like the modern era and like until the 20th century, mid 20th century. And that's not true, obviously. You have women artists dating very, very far back. They just are often overlooked. So I really appreciate that this is a museum that, even though it's local, and some of the localized museums do tend to be, understandably, small, but they tend to sort of stick to just their permanent exhibit, and like that's it. I like that Bruce Castle makes an effort to have additional temporary exhibits that are, shifting to draw people in. So I'm going to end this by saying that what I say at the end of all of my videos of free things to do, and that is that this is not an exhaustive list. There are plenty of other historic estates that are free to visit, either because they're always free. There are an additional number that are free if you get a National Art Pass. So if you're living in the UK, I would highly recommend getting a National Art Pass. If you're just visiting as a tourist, it's not worth it. But if you're here for long term, definitely get one, because it's not just for art museums. It does include many of these historical estates. So if you are someone who is really into like old places, you want to see the castles and the mansions and just the old estates, and journey back in time for a little bit and be in an atmosphere where you can sort of imagine that you're living in a different time, then you will not be at a loss of places to visit in London. Like, subscribe, tell your friends how gnarly this channel is, and I'll see you next time.